So anyway, I'm just going to introduce, this is Rob Wallstrom, who is so kind to take the time out to come and join us today, because I'm sure he's very, very busy. So I hope that you'll take full advantage of the opportunity you have to interact with him. And as I said before, he's going to take about 10 minutes just to share whatever he wants to share about himself and the company. And then we'll just open it up to questions from that point on. And like I said, if you don't care to use the microphone, that will help with the recording and will benefit others who watch it online. Okay? Great.
Well, thank you very much for having me. It feels very strange to speak in a microphone with a group around the table. But and when I was asked to kind of do a 10-minute introduction, talking about myself is never anything I love to do, but I'll go ahead and give it a shot. So I'll give you a little bit about my story, and then the Vera Bradley story is kind of how I will do it. But it was interesting because when I was going to college, I actually thought I was going to go in and be going to ministry and be a pastor is what I thought I was going to do. But I remember having, I never did anything my dad wanted me to do, but for some reason he wanted me to go and do. He said, if you want to do that, you still have to get a degree where you can make money, so you need to go do something else. So I got an accounting degree. And so I got an accounting degree in San Diego. I grew up outside of LA. So I had a business degree in accounting. I had to put myself through school. And so I was in retail the entire time. And by the time I got out, I said, okay, well, I'll do that for a year. And then 30 years later, I'm still in retail. So it's kind of funny how life turns out sometimes. And even from, kind of personal passion, right? Why did I stay in it so long, particularly when I've always had this other thing in the back of my mind? It's kind of like every year I'm like, do I stay in business? Do I go into the ministry? It's been a year-to-year type of decision. And I think one thing that I've always loved about being in business is an opportunity to build things and to help people. And so I've always kind of approached my career a little bit that way. And I think that's what's kept me in it as long as I've been in it. But so, that was kind of how I fell into retail. I worked for companies in Southern California that were department stores back before you all were born, back in the 80s. And all these department store companies started coming together, and department stores used to be very special, unique places to shop, but they started to become very price driven. So I left and I went to work for a company called Saks Fifth Avenue. So I managed a lot of stores for them around the country, including the one on Fifth Avenue for 5 years. And then I went in, and I'll never forget, I had left what we'll call it Macy's in Southern California to go to Saks Fifth Avenue for one big reason, because Macy's was becoming a discount operation, and I didn't want to do that. I said I wanted to go work in a type of retail store that had great product, treated their people well, did everything right, so to speak. So I went and worked for Saks Fifth Avenue and did that for a while. And then the chairman of the company came in and said, I want you to go run our off-price division, and I want you to kind of rebuild it. And the exact words that were going through my mind was, when hell freezes over. I had absolutely no desire to do it. And I remember I called a few people who I respected their opinion and said, I don't want to do this. It's a good opportunity, but it's not what I want to do, blah, 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 blah. And everybody was like, you're crazy. You need to do this, best thing for your career, go do this. And so I listened to them instead of listening to myself, and it worked out very well for me. So I basically ran our off-price division for 5 years, kind of built that into a real vibrant part of the business. And then Vera Bradley came knocking on my door and said, would you like to come over and be the CEO of Vera Bradley? And so that's kind of how my journey went. And then Vera Bradley, was started in 1982, such an amazing company. And it was interesting because when they called, I knew almost nothing about Vera Bradley. As a matter of fact, growing up in Southern California, it was not there. So had never seen it, never heard about it. The most ironic part is when I started at the off-price division at Saks Off Fifth, I remember one of my first visits to stores is they had these walls in the stockroom full of all this cotton quilted bag business. And I'm like, what is this? I don't even get what this is. And they said, well, there's a really popular brand called Vera Bradley, and we knocked it off, but nobody wants it. So that was my experience with it. And when I joined Vera Bradley, I found out how many companies tried to knock off Vera Bradley and never could. And I think part of it is because the company that Vera Bradley built is so unique and so special. And I think it's such an amazing story. because these two women started this company just out of a desire to kind of do something, and Barb and Pat were great entrepreneurs and just kind of started. They came with an idea, they went down to Joann's Fabric, they made a bag, they sold it, they made another one, they sold another one, and before you knew it, they had built a $500 million business. But all along, they wanted to build a great company. They wanted to treat people right. It was all about relationships, so both inside the company, business partners, and customers felt it. I'll never forget when I joined the company, we would see letters from customers. And I've been in retail for 20 some odd years before that, and these letters were crazy. They were letters like, and they were always very poignant, were the ones that stood out, right? So like one was, I was at the doctor, I got a cancer diagnosis, and the first place I wanted to go was to my Vera Bradley store to go talk to the salespeople in Vera Bradley because I know that they would care about me. Or we got another one from a husband who sent us pictures of his wife had passed away, and because she loved her Vera Bradley so much, he had all of her bags made into pillows and stuff to keep it around. I mean, the stories like that just go on and on and on. And I think it's a real testament to how they built the business. And at the end of the day, it was important for the business to succeed, but it was more important to do the right thing, have a great impact. And when the opportunity came up for Vera Bradley, what really attracted me to it, besides it was a business opportunity, but it was what the company stood for. It was a company that was not a fashion company. It was, because the fashion industry for so long was built upon basically telling people that there's something wrong with you, right? If you buy our stuff, you'll be better, whatever that is. You'll look more successful, you'll be more powerful, you'll look better, whatever it is, somehow buying our stuff improves who you are. And what I loved about Vera Bradley was never about that. That was never what the product was meant to do. It was meant to just be part of your family, part of your life, something that people shared. There's very few products that grandmothers, mothers, and daughters can all participate in, but it was one of those things that became very multi-generational. So that was really what attracted me to the business, and this ability to hopefully set this company up to really have an impact. And it's been an interesting journey because I've been there for 6 years. And it's been an interesting journey going from what was kind of a niche business and a niche product and very family oriented, right kind of in what was going on with fashion, going through a cycle where it was out of the fashion cycle and trying to rebalance and find a way for the company to be healthy again. And that's kind of the journey we've been going through over the last 5 years. And the last kind of year and a half, it's starting to come together. And we've been starting to platform ourselves to really become a company of bringing lifestyle brands with a strong purpose behind them. And so we just recently this year did our first acquisition. We bought another company called Pura Vida, which ironically enough is in San Diego. Ironically enough happens to be founded by two friends, two guys who were on a vacation and had an idea. There were two guys wandering down the beach selling these string bracelets. And they were looking, the two guys who were on vacation were looking for a business, so they bought some of them, and then they asked the guys, can you make like 100 of them? And they said, okay, we'll come back the next day. They took the 100 back home with them to San Diego. They gave the guys on the beach, these guys were homeless. They gave them a burner phone and a PayPal account. And went to San Diego, sold out the first day with the bracelets in the local surf stores, called the guys again and said, can you make 100 more? And before you know it, they've got a business this year that'll do over $125 million in 6 years. So very similar story to kind of Vera Bradley, and it's the same thing. They have big charity purpose, big things they're doing. And so we're trying to stitch together this platform of purpose-driven companies. I'm a big believer in a great book. It's kind of a classic business book, and it's starting to become very popular nowadays. Business has changed, luckily. And the name of the book is Conscious Capitalism, and talking about really how what happened in the country was interesting reading, but basically in the 80s, capitalism started to take a different turn than what it had been historically. So it had become, in the 80s, it was like the purpose of business is to make money, period. Everything else that happens in the world happens outside of business. Just make money, and then the world can take care of the rest. Before that, that was not capitalism. Capitalism, when I went to business school, was 100% focused on stakeholders. It was not, shareholders were only one of the many stakeholders. They were not the sole focus. But during the 80s, 90s, 2000s, it was really all about the shareholder. And I think what's exciting is it's going back to where we have to be stakeholder focused. And so this new company that we're really setting up is truly stakeholder focused. Vera Bradley does so many things, whether it's, we've helped raise over $30 million for breast cancer research, which is an amazing story, because what we do is work with IU, and the money that we fund down there, they use as seed money for research. So what they do is they fund all the stuff that they can't raise money for, it's too early, and get early results and then goes raise money. So they've actually turned that $30 million into hundreds of millions of dollars of research money. So we've done that. We're working with Blessings in a Backpack, helping underprivileged kids who don't have food and stuff in schools, and reaching, it was like, it was 25,000, 50,000, it'll be 100,000 next year, and just starting to build that. We're working with a production facility, or not really a production facility, but a ministry down in the Dominican Republic that helps rescue young girls out of the sex industry and all that, and they make handbags, and we're helping to set them up and get them going. So there's all these things that we're doing at Vera Bradley that are so much more than just designing bags. We're doing that, focus on that, but to us, it's how can we make more money so we can have more impact in people's lives, and how does that impact drive us making the company successful so we can do more and more and more. And that's really this new platform that we're setting up and super excited about right now. So it's a little bit of an introduction. Hopefully that will stimulate some conversations, and I'm really looking forward to hearing what interests you and what questions you have. So. The first one's always the hard. Now some of you started before we even began, so
So concerning like regular products like bracelets or luggage, any bags, like how can you take something that's like so common and just come up with a new business idea and be successful as Vera Bradley?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, it's interesting, right? Because whether it's Vera Bradley or whether it's Pura Vida, which is the bracelet company, I think what's interesting is both of them are very similar that way. So when Vera Bradley first started, all they did was go down to the local fabric store, John Fabrics, and make a bag, right? Anybody could do that. And probably during home ec classes back in those days and the local schools, everybody was probably making a cotton quilted bag in their bedroom. And the same thing with Pura Vida bracelets. They're just string bracelets, right? Anybody could go make one. It's not that hard to do. And plenty of people do, right? It's a craft that plenty of people do. But I think what it shows is the real ability for a brand to come together, because people are not just buying the product, they're actually buying, and it's partially the name. Some people buy for a name, like I want to acquire, right? And some people buy for a name because of just they want to be part of it. It's kind of like when people root for a sports team, right? They go, okay, I'm a Colts fan because I want to be part of that, or I'm a, whatever, you just want to be part of the group. And so sometimes people will buy into a brand to be part of the group. And I think both of these brands, it's the second. It's not so much status as much as belonging. And that's what we find. I loved it because we hired a creative designer 3 years ago, and she was driving up. She's worked for companies all over the world. She's Irish. She worked in Ireland. She's worked in the US. She was in Texas before she came here. And she was driving up, and she stopped somewhere between Dallas and Fort Wayne and went to a Subway, right? Typical cross country, stopped in the Subway. These two women, one woman's there with the Vera Bradley bag, another woman comes in the door with her Vera Bradley bag, and all of a sudden, oh, where'd you get your bag? Where'd you get? And they went and had lunch together, and she's like, am I joining a cult? What is this place, right? But what you find with a lot of Vera Bradley customers is it is like that, because they're kind of like, okay, well, if you like Vera Bradley, you must be nice, and I would enjoy being with you, and so they hang out together. We've had stories of people going, I was stranded on a plane, but I found somebody else in the airport who had a Vera Bradley duffel bag, so we drove together, to the next city. And it's part of that belonging. It's like if you belong to that, you're kind of... What? Oh, it wasn't me, it was somebody else. It was two customers, but two customers who didn't know each other, who just was like, okay, yeah, I'll get in a car with you for 3 hours, right?
I thought it was you.
No, it wasn't me.
What made you partner with Pura Vida?
Great
How did that
question.
decision come about?
Yeah.
And then how is that working? Because
Yeah.
I like Pura Vida,
Yeah.
I used to have a bunch of Vera Bradley, so
Oh, good.
I
So-
want to know kind of how it happened.
You understand that.
Yeah.
I think, well, two things, right? It first starts with, as a company with Vera Bradley, we had to make we had to take stock of where are we as a company, right? Where are we as a brand? So we had really strong cash flow generation as a business, and the question is, what did we want to do with that? What was the best use of that cash? And so one thing you could do is invest in business, you can give it back to shareholders, or you can go acquire something else. And we really went through that analysis and said, we're not gonna need to use that cash in the business itself. We don't need that much cash. So it was a good time to look for an acquisition. So that was the beginning, right? And then we said, what kind of brand do we want? And we said, we definitely want one that has a purpose-driven commitment. We want something that's in this kind of casual, affordable lifestyle space, which kind of like Vera Bradley is, right? It's not it's not a luxury product. It's not like buying a $1,000 handbag or a piece of Tiffany jewelry. I mean, it's a very approachable. We thought that was important. And then third, we were looking for a digitally native business. So we wanted a business that's kind of grown up in the new retail world, where it's e-commerce first, marketing driven, brand driven. And we wanted a company with a very strong financial performance, because most digital retail businesses have very ugly financial P&Ls. They just generally don't work. But this one actually checked all those boxes. So great purpose-driven, affordable casual, great brand, and very profitable. And at the end of the day, we could come up with a price that was right. So kind of all those things came together, and it's been a great marriage so far, and I think it's going to be great for both businesses, because what they need, and I think a lot of these digitally native brands are growing need, is they don't know infrastructure. They don't know law, they don't know legal, they don't know any of that stuff. As a matter of fact, they were doing all kinds of things before that they shouldn't be doing. And not as unethical, but just not understanding all the rules and regulations, and they weren't big enough. So we can come behind them and supply all of their infrastructure needs and let them do what they do well. And we're hoping that that's going to keep their growth going, and it has been. And then at the same time, that gives Vera Bradley some new ideas, some new thoughts of how to do things different. And so it helps us too. And so we're learning on the marketing, the social engagement. We're having a conversation earlier, not to put you on the spot, but we're talking about Fall Raven backpacks, which I'm sure a lot of people in the room know about. And they've been driven completely because of the strong social digital presentation that they have to the consumer, and starting to make an impact in the market. And we're like, we've got to get better, and we've got to be out there, because there's no reason why Vera Bradley can't be doing the same thing. So we're learning from that.
How does Vera Bradley's community interaction play a part to their success? So you see Vera Bradley, especially in Fort Wayne, obviously everywhere, from Dink Caps and their fundraisers. Crystal Wallen specifically talks a lot about their marketing and how they do that. What would you say that has played a part of Vera Bradley's success, or it's just been part of their foundation from the beginning?
I think one, it's been more of the foundation. It's interesting, right? It's really interesting for me being part of Fort Wayne. There's a long story behind that, but being part of Fort Wayne and watching, because there's so many different great companies in Fort Wayne, Sweetwater and Parkview and us and other ones who do things. And for some, it's easy to invest even deeper in the community, because what you're doing in the community is both helping the community and also helping your consumer, right? So a perfect example would be Parkview would be the best example of it, right? Because all their customers are in Fort Wayne. So where for us, being a national company, it's not like just advertising in Fort Wayne won't quite.
Right, and that's kind of what I was curious about, because you guys are more of it's a strong Fort Wayne, it's strong Fort Wayne community integration. You see all the the causes and support, and I know they do stuff in other cities. So it's just kind of interesting how they manage that and how they maybe expanded that out from the home city, and if that's played into success in other markets as well.
Yeah, and so for us, in terms of that civic community involvement, we're stronger in Fort Wayne than anywhere else. But what we try to do is pick national things to become involved in.
That makes sense.
Sit above the community, so
that anybody can get behind.
Like lessons in a backpack or breast cancer, things that any community.
That makes sense. Anything anybody can get behind.
Yeah. As opposed to being specific to Cleveland or Philadelphia.
That makes sense.
Else like that. So it's always a tricky balance for us. how much to put in the community,
Right.
how much to
Right.
across the nation. So-
Right, exactly.
What is one thing that you guys look in like your employees and what makes you different from like all the other companies as far as like the employment?
So let me make sure I heard the question. So one, what do we look for in employees? And then two, what do we do in terms of creating the environment? Yeah. I think, let me answer the second one, I'll go back to the first one. So for us, I think one thing that makes Vera Bradley very different is that A, culture is really important to us. And I think the best way I would explain to it is we have two things that we talk about all the time. And there are two programs that kind of underpin our culture. One is what we call Leaders by Design. And the other thing that we have focus on is kind of what we call the whole person. So what do I mean by that? So one, we really encourage all of our associates that every single person in the company is a leader. I think one of the biggest misconceptions is that managers are leaders and nobody else is, which is a complete lie, right? Because really, what is the definition of a leader? You're leading somebody somewhere. And everybody is leading somebody somewhere. The only question is, where are you leading them, right? So are you leading them to have a positive impact, negative impact? Are you leading them to be encouraged? Or are you leading them to be discouraged? So part of it is that. So we really get everybody in the company saying, we're part of this, right? We're not either a victim of it or a receiver of it. We are creating the culture, which I think is important. And then we also talk about, we're very focused on what we call a whole person, which we mean by that is we said, for any employee in the company to be successful, they need to have the right skills. They need to be producing good results, but they also need to be taken care of from a financial standpoint, an impact, career development standpoint, and also a personal standpoint. Because at the end of the day, what's going on at home for people can have as much of an impact on their work performance as the skills that they have. And so we really try to encourage a very holistic environment. And I think that's created such a unique culture at Vera Bradley. I think one story that's great, Barb talks about the fact, one of our founders, she says, she won't bring anybody into Vera Bradley on the weekend. And she said, because if they come on the weekend, they haven't visited Vera Bradley. Because it's not the building, it's not the stuff, it's the people. And I think that culture is kind of been there and is part of who we are. And I always say culture is an interesting thing. There's a lot of companies talk about their culture, which is a statement on the wall, which is not culture. Culture is actually the behaviors that are happening every day. That's the culture. And that's where I think Vera Bradley has always excelled. And what I've found has been interesting, people ask me when I go around the country, should Vera Bradley stay in Fort Wayne? Is it hard to get talent to Fort Wayne? It's a very fair question. And I said the way I look at it is Fort Wayne is a filter, which I think has been instrumental in the company's success, but it's a filter. I said there's a lot of people that won't come to Fort Wayne. You know, if you're, again, in our business, a lot of it's out of New York, right? I spent 12 years in New York. I've lived around the country. I lived in Texas for 5 years. I'm a native Southern California person. I've kind of been around. My wife grew up in Chicago. But a lot of people who want the newest restaurant, the newest, whatever, Fort Wayne's not going to be the same as living in Chicago or New York, right? But I said the people that come into Fort Wayne and are about community, family, they love it here. And so I said what it does is people who have a tendency to be a little bit more self-focused aren't as happy in Fort Wayne and in Vera Bradley, but that's okay for us. Because what we need is we need employees who care about each other, care about the community, care about the customer. And so I said if we moved it into New York, we would lose what Vera Bradley is. The culture would disappear overnight because it's a different way of looking at life. You can argue better or worse, well, let somebody else have that conversation, but it is definitely different. So we look for people like that who want to do that, and we really are looking for people who are, I always say, I was asked a question earlier, what's helped me in my career, what advice would I give to people, or I said bottom line is we encourage people to create value. Creating value is the secret to success. And a lot of you might think value just means money for the company. That is one of the two things. Making money for any business is important. I would argue it's almost important for anything anybody does because it's hard to sustain. money is like the food of the organism, right? So you have to make money. But most, even as important to that, is how do you create value in people too, and in relationships. And so we look for people who say, I'm here to create value, both financial and personal value. And those are the people that we're most excited about.
Can I ask you a career question? Did you face any pitfalls or risks as you went through the climb, the corporate climb, Saks Fifth Avenue, Macy's, and then to Helm, Vera Bradley, having a Christ-centered ethic in a cutthroat retail industry that you want to share with people that are getting ready to start careers?
Absolutely. I'll tell you what that experience has been like, and I think things that I've learned along the way with it. So, first of all, you have to remember that being in Fort Wayne is completely different than other parts of the country, particularly around the idea of faith, Christianity, sharing that. Is growing up in Southern California and working in New York, you can imagine that the cultural environment's very different. And growing up in California, if one thing, the stories that you hear about California probably in some ways are very true, right? Very, very litigious environment. So you learn very quickly you have to be very, very quiet about everything you do. But one thing I found with my faith is that, to me, it was always what was driving me to care about people, and care about building sustainability, and care about building long-term, was really deep within my faith and what I felt God was calling me to do. And I think the other thing I learned in that journey for me is, I told you my early story was, right, be a pastor and go into business. And I'll tell you, when I first faced that thing, I thought those were two different paths. And I would tell you, I've learned a lot in 30 years, but I think it was not two different paths. It was one path, and I think what God was doing was calling me to have the ministry inside that workplace and be able to create a work environment, be part of that movement, to say, let's worry about people, let's impact people, let's help people. But you have to be, I would say, creative in it. You always want to be true to who you are and who you are, but you also have to be sensitive in a work environment, what that means, particularly in a lot of major companies. So I would say I never feel that I faced a crisis where I had to make a choice one way or another. I never felt like it was my faith or business. There's plenty of times where people want you to do the wrong thing, but it's just, to me, it was never even a choice. And I can think about a couple things that have happened in my career where I've had to take very hard stands in terms of risks, and big risks. And one thing I always talk to people at work, because everybody's like, well, what about risk, right? We want an environment where we want to be able to take risks, and we want everybody to congratulate me whether I fail or I lose. And I always say, well, guess what? That's actually not risk, is it? That's not risk, right? Risk is when you're willing to put yourself out there on the line with severe consequences. That's risky, right? Trying to walk on a tightrope across the Grand Canyon is very risky. Trying to walk on a string across the floor that you're not going to fall off on is not very risky. And so I think it's the same thing. I think you get faced with that with everything, but you have to find that line. And for me, it's never felt that hard. So.
Well, your ethics both seem to fit Vera Bradley's pretty well, and that seemed to be why else would you say you were recruited, and what really led you into Vera Bradley from your own perspective, from your own point?
Yeah, I was going to say, I was wondering how you were going to have that question. Is it how I ended up here? You have to ask everybody who hired me too to really find the real story. But I think in terms of, from my perspective, what brought me here was two things. Is one, I was personally, from a career standpoint, at the place where I was looking for a CEO opportunity, so that was part of what made it interesting. But to me, as I keep saying, more than anything, it was what the company was, the culture of the company, what it stood for, the ability to make an impact. One thing that's always driven me every single job I've taken, and why did I eventually take that off-price job at Saks, is the ability to make an impact, to position a business for vision, to create a great culture, to expand and have impact on people's lives. And I thought there was an opportunity to do that at Vera Bradley. And I would tell you, it's like I was praying about it, because part of my story is my wife's in Glen Ellen outside of Chicago, and her family's up there. I'll never forget, before we got married, we went to Chicago, visited family, did the whole thing. And one of the things I told her, I said, I love you. I really love you, but I just have to ask you this one question. We don't ever have to live in Chicago, do we? I said, I never want to live in the Midwest. You got to remember, I'm an LA guy, so, you know. So I was like, I do not want to be in the Midwest. It's way too flat. I can't take it, you know. And so that was the story when Vera Bradley called. I was like, oh yeah, it's in the middle of the Midwest. So my first thought was, I'm not so excited about that part of it, but I'll hear the rest of the story. And I did, and I've developed such an appreciation for the Midwest and the culture, because I've never lived anywhere that has the culture that I've found in the Midwest. I mean, people care and are nice, and community is important. And it's been interesting for me, because I say a lot of things you hear in media about kind of the American dream being dead, right? I said I came to Fort Wayne, I'm like, oh my goodness. You can actually buy a house for $100,000. Like, two people could have like normal jobs and actually have a house that's in a nice neighborhood, and their kids can go to school and they can have a life. I never seen that anywhere else in the country, anywhere I've been, because that's not what you can find in most places. And so I think it creates a unique culture, because people are not fighting every day to survive. And I think that's what we miss in this whole divide in the country, is people in the cities are fighting every day just to make it to the next day. And so it does cause people to live differently. So it's been interesting.
So, is Vera Bradley international, or is it just nationally in the United States?
Generally, it's just nationally. We had a business in Japan for a while, but we ended up shutting that one down. We'll eventually go international again, but it's not easy for a brand like Vera Bradley that's built upon relationships and culture to easily go international.
Yeah.
It's easier to sell product that's kind of cool and hip and, you know, that type of thing, has a celebrity attached to it. Those are easy to go international than kind of value companies. So we're trying to figure out how do we manage it.
So if somebody wants to make like a contract with Vera Bradley to maybe like buy something in bulk, maybe like one trailer of bags and ship it internationally, how would you think that would accomplish in terms of cost, or even like all cost of doing all of that? Because if somebody like have a business back in the Middle East and they want to send like shipment of bags to there and sell it, how would you think that would be accomplished?
Well, I think part of it is, for us, it's important for us from a brand standpoint, is how is it going to be, where is it going to be, how's it going to be shown, because we're not necessarily chasing the dollar from our standpoint. What we're trying to chase is kind of building the brand. So part of it is just whoever would be interested is contacting us, we'd have a conversation and figure out what does it look like, what does that partnership look like. So, but always open to things. And if you have any ideas, then I said, just so you guys know, I'll make it really easy. If I can do anything to help you, or you have any questions afterwards, my email is very easy. Rob@verabradley.com. So if you can remember Rob and Vera Bradley, you got it. So
How do you find the balance between being zealous and taking risk and not being complacent in all the areas of your life, from spiritual to family to work, and how do you decide which one to chase without damaging the others?
wow, that's a good one. I think those balance in lives are hard, right? I think, you know, it's funny because there's always this idea of work-life balance. And it's a funny word, right? Because if you really think about balance, what is balance? Right? Balance is you put a little on, you take a little off, you
Right.
find your middle. But the trick is it doesn't stay that way. Right? It never stays that way. So you're always adjusting and trying to balance. And I think for me, what's been important in that journey is first of all, I know who I am and what's most important to me, right? And to me, it's super simple. And to me, it's like God first, family second, others third, maybe then business, and then maybe.
I was really hoping you were going to say that, because my next question is, how do you support that family if you can't do the business side of it? Because that comes third.
Yeah.
Obviously, if you're addressing the other two, how do you know?
You gotta do all of them, and I'll tell you, in my life, I made very opposite decisions. So, I'll never forget, one of the strongest family decisions I ever made is I was 26, and my dad got diagnosed with cancer, and it was terminal, and so, he had weeks, months to live. And I was in the middle of opening a new store for the department store in Southern California, I was working 20 hours a day. And I walked into my boss's office and I handed him my resignation. And I said, I can't do this. My family's more important to me. I'm out. It so happened that I had a great boss, and he said, I don't care if you don't show up whenever you want. Take care of your family. And he was pretty smart, because I basically worked from overnight, and so I kind of did both of them, but that was the most extreme on the family. But there's been other times where I've worked 20 hours a day, 7 days a week to get things done too. But it's like, to your point, how do you find that balance? How do you invest here for the moment, and then how do you invest here for a moment? But I think you have to start with who you are and what's most important to you, and where are your values, and you can't violate those. But you have to know, anybody who gives you the lie that somehow you're gonna be able to do all of it well, forget it. That's just a fallacy. You're never gonna do it all well. But you figure out how to invest in different places. And I think from a spiritual investment standpoint, to me, that's the one that you've got to keep that front and foremost, because it affects everything else.
Right.
If your spiritual health is good, it's much easier to balance. If that's off, you're really hard. So to me, it's always, that's why we say that's got to be number one. Everything else flows from that. So even at the end of the day, family's got to come second to that. So.
Thank you.
Speaking of balance, Rob, I'm sure that I'm sure this is true of Sweetwater and other companies too. You probably have people coming all the time and asking you for help philanthropically. So how do you balance the line between being a for-profit company but also being charitable? And I'm not talking about individuals, I'm talking about the corporate aspect of it.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And we never give all the money that everybody wants us to give, right? So it is hard. And I think that it goes back to a little bit maybe what we're talking about in work-life balance, right? You first have to start by, what are the things that you believe are true to your corporate, who you are, right? Because the corporation in and of itself has to have its own value set and what is its priorities. And so I think you start there. And so for us at Vera Bradley, we've always said women and children are the most important thing for us. That's the business we're in. It's aligned with who we are. You have to choose where you're going to make an impact. We've also said that we want to make an impact. Just throwing money around to us is not as interesting as building sustainable relationships. And so we try to do that. But then we also say locally in the community, there is a budget that we carve out because it's part of what you should do. It's what you need to do. And you need to support the local community. And so we have that budget. So you'll see us do things like, buy a table here or do something there, which is what I call being supportive. But it's not the same as really building strategic partnerships with charities, which is really what we really put the real money behind. So
What charities do you work with in town? That you have a relationship?
we really don't have a deep one in town. They're really more national, right? So for us, the big three charities that are our most important charities are our foundation, which happens to support IU School of Medicine. So it's in Indiana, but it's not in Fort Wayne. But we obviously do the classic and other things that are kind of attached with that, and Tickle Pink and stuff here in town. So you'll see us show up a lot around the breast cancer stuff in town. The other big one we do is Blessings in a Backpack, which happens to have a very active chapter in Fort Wayne, but it really is a national organization. Those are two of the biggest ones. And the third one we picked up was this company called New Hope Girls in the Dominican Republic, which was actually through somebody here in Fort Wayne who was involved in the ministry. But in town, we do a lot of smaller things, and we try to get involved in whether it's doing things. We do a lot, obviously, around the holidays and gifts and different charities, and we've been involved with Rescue Mission, YWCA, and all these areas that are kind of focused around family, those type of things.
Are there any opportunities for students? Like,
Good. Yeah, there's always opportunities. Yeah, we're always looking for talent. We always can do, we do have a pretty robust internship program. We do have opportunities for students. So that's why I said if anybody has any interest, just reach out.
What would you say would be the top business decisions besides just your moving from Macy's to Saks to Vera Bradley that really made you somebody both attractive to Vera Bradley and to other companies?
Yeah, I think if I had to go back, you'll hear me repeat the same thing over and over again, but I would say simply creating value. So everywhere I've been, that's always been what I've focused on. I think the biggest thing that happens in jobs is that people get trapped in the stuff they do as opposed to what they are trying to accomplish. And that happens at every level. And we all have to fight against the stuff sucking the life out of us. So that can be, I remember when my first job, I worked for a restaurant equipment company, and I was cleaning toilets and reconditioning restaurant equipment and selling stuff and doing everything. But even in that job, I'm like, well, what really makes a difference, right? How do I invest? And I can tell you in my career, there's always been times where I've created new business opportunities, new things that have made a business successful, repositioned, re-strategized it, but created value and created culture. And if I would say one thing that I've enjoyed most in my career is those two things. And I can look back on probably just about everywhere I've been and said, being there, I felt like I left it with a better vision, a more distinct purpose, and a better culture. And those things with time have helped me get to where I am. But really creating value.
And just going on, could I ask for some of your more distinct examples that stand out to you in particular?
Yeah, well, I would say two things. I would say one, there's an earlier question about risk. And I think one thing with any career, and I probably don't care what you do, if you don't take risk, you're probably not creating value. So you've got to take risk. One of the stories I love, I have a bunch of them, but I was running a store in Texas, and our CEO came there, and we were trying to take this store that was a $25 million store and make it a $50 million store in San Antonio. And so I was in the middle of helping to transform kind of everything about the store. And one thing being Saks is the designer highest, most expensive product is always what's important to get the best customers in the community, right? If you don't have the best product, you're not going to get the best customers. Our CEO came in and said, you guys aren't selling this, I'm just going to take it all out. And I literally basically told her no. I said, I need 6 months, give me 6 months. And we kind of fought it out on the middle of the floor. People always looked at me like, are you crazy? You're fighting with the CEO. And she did. And sure enough, we got it turned around, and it worked. And so she was the one that turned around and dragged me to New York. And I'll never forget when she brought me to New York to run the store in New York. Everybody else in the company was like, who is this person? Usually the person who gets that is somebody we've all known, has been around for a while, done all these different things, and she kind of pulled me out of the, some place, and everybody was like, why did you do that? It was because she knew that I could help create something. And so we did the same thing when I went to Off Fifth. We completely changed the off-price division. We redid the entire business model, we redid the stores. It used to be a business that was selling what was left over. We went out and started making our own product, creating our own product, and really took a very aggressive new approach to it, and it worked, and it became one of the jewels of the Saks business. But you have to be willing to take that risk. But I would say what leads to that risk, more than anything, is learning to listen and think. And spend time, what are people's ideas, what's going on, what does the customer want? There's always huge opportunity. The hardest thing when you're in any role is you start behaving one way and it's harder to break the mold. And I think the trick is being able to be open and think outside of what you're experiencing every day is really important. So, did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
So you started out as an accountant, but didn't end up an accountant, but rather a CIO. If you were to go back, would you have done anything different in college? What would that be?
You know, it's so funny, right? Because you can look back and say, would you do something different? And, you know, in hindsight, it sounds weird, but I'd almost say no. And the reason I would say no is I've felt, it's been interesting in my career, I've felt God's hand steering it. Even when I felt that I was, in hindsight, maybe doing the wrong thing, making the wrong decision, I've seen those decisions work out to where it is today and realized that if I hadn't done those things, I wouldn't be where I am today. So it sounds strange, but I don't know that I would have done anything different. So I feel like I've been in the path that God created for me and trying to be faithful to that.
If I could just follow up real quick, why did you pick accounting?
Very simply, it was that I definitely want to go into the ministry. Obviously, a lot of pastors have a hard time feeding their family, and so my dad was like, you need something you can make money. I was thinking, well, accounting, you can kind of do that on the side, kind of part-time, kind of, pay a few bills, so why not? That's why I did it. It was no bigger idea than that. It was really that simple. And I think at the same time, my dad convinced me, even if you go into the ministry, you're going to need to know accounting anyway, so you might as well use that. But it was funny because I was a semi-rebellious kid. My dad and I always had a little bit of a conflicting relationship, and it was one of the few times he convinced me to do something. And I always say, I don't know how that happened. Even as I look back, I don't know how that happened, but I have a feeling that I think God convinced me more than he did. So it seems strange that God would have convinced me not to go directly into the ministry, but in hindsight, I think he did. So.
I have a question. Who are the people that you look up to, I guess, like, even as you were growing up? Are they different than when you were in college, thinking about what you were going to do, or are they still the same?
It's so funny because, and I don't know if this is a personality problem. Maybe it is. You guys can decide. I would say there's probably, I almost hate to say it because it almost sounds trite, but I would say I don't really look up to people. To me, I've always looked at Christ and what Jesus did, and that's what I look at. And everybody else, we're all kind of the same thing, learn something from everybody, but there's nobody I'd ever say, oh, I wanted to be like. There's nobody who's ever been in that space in my mind. So I admire people and what they've done, but just because I admire them doesn't mean that I want to follow them. I can give you plenty of people I admire, but not people who I try to mold myself around. So.
Are there any books that you would recommend that the students read that would be helpful to them?
Yeah, well, so it depends what type of things you want to know. But I think that from a business standpoint, I think that Conscious Capitalism book is a great book. I think another book that's great is this book called Blue Ocean. It's a great strategy book on business. Another thing I always encourage everybody to read, if there's one thing on leadership to me, which has been the best thing I've ever read, and I'll give you the more deep one and then the soft one. But the deep one is there's a Harvard business thing that came out of the book Good to Be Great, which is one of the classic business books. It's called Level 5 Leadership. And to me, if you want to be a great reader, read that. If you do that, you're going to be a great leader. And so, great book. And very simply, it is two things: humility and tenacious will, right? Those are kind of the two traits. And humility, very simply, is it's just not about you. And I think it's the thing, if I'm most fearful for people now, is I think we've grown up in a culture for quite a while that's been trying to train everybody that's all about you. You know, you're the center of the universe, everybody else needs to respect you, needs to behave the way you want them to. And it just doesn't work, right? Because if all of you are the center of the universe, you can't all be, right? So if it's about being the center of the universe, the conflict that causes is extraordinary. And so to me, it's not about me, it's about the organization, it's about the group, it's about the people. How is that the center of the universe? You are merely a participant in that journey. So those from a leadership standpoint are amazing. And then I think from a spiritual standpoint, one of the best books, and it made me in tears, or probably the biggest thing in my life, was a author by the name of Dietrich Bonhoeffer, The Cost of Discipleship, which is just extraordinary. And he was one of the people that stood up during World War II, and then, you know, the Nazis and all that, from a faith standpoint, and really spoke out against the church and what the church was not doing. So amazing. So.
What's the CEO's job description? What do you do?
Whatever needs to be done. But no, seriously, what I think is most important to do is probably a few things. I think more than anything, a CEO's job is vision. And what I mean by that is, where is the company going? And does everybody fully understand that? Because if you do that, the rest of it you got a shot at. If you don't do that, you're going to have chaos. So, and part of that vision is understanding what's happening in the marketplace, what the strengths of the business are. It's not easy to do, but the number one thing is probably vision. I think number two is culture, which is around communication, the right people, the right environment, creating the right team. And then I think the third is really more the financial investment side of it and understanding that. And those are the three things you need to kind of keep your hands around. But if you do that, you'll be successful. So, but it is interesting because it's every role is really important. There's always the times where what I'll call the autocratic driven CEO, right? Which I think about the Elon Musks and some of the people that are out there. They do really well for transformation, short term. But usually by the time they're done, there's so much you have to pick up that it's usually not the epitome of the best CEO. And that's why if you read the level 5, it'll tell you a lot about, if you think about a level 5 leadership, if you do that, you're going to be a good CEO too. So.
This might be a tricky question to answer, but what are the challenges of working with a family business like this?
Yeah. I think it's interesting because I think sometimes working with family businesses, there's two different elements and they can get confused. So one, I think there's new businesses that start that are incredibly successful, do incredibly well, and then one day they wake up and it's not going so well. And that's usually when family businesses have a tendency to bring people from the outside. Right? So one thing that's unique about family businesses is that quite often people will talk about how hard it is to work with a family business. Part of the reason is usually the business is in a stage of change, which is really hard, right? Because the family grew a business from a place where it's really successful, and now it needs to change. Nobody likes to change. None of us like to change. It's painful, it's hard, we all know it. Every time we do it, it's hard to do. So I think coming into a family business, quite often the hardest part is setting up a new direction and getting the family to move with you. And that rarely happens. So that's one version. The other version is working with the family, and I think working with the family if the business is not in transition I think then what it just takes is a leader who has enough humility that is fine sharing direction, position, everything with the family. But I think that's critical, because most family businesses, there's still a lot of, ego might be the wrong word, but maybe personal investment in, just emotional investment in what the business is. And so for them just to step aside is hard. So I think you
I
need
can
to.
see how it might be tricky too, because maybe they want their children or their grandchildren to be taking leadership roles in the company. And maybe the children and grandchildren don't want to, but they don't have the courage to tell the parents, and you're in the middle of it. Or maybe the offspring are not the right leaders to do it, and yet they've been marked for that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
I can see all sorts of relation dynamics that could cause trouble.
yeah. And I would tell you, my experience with family business, right, coming into Vera Bradley, what I've experienced is, one, we didn't have the generational issue that you spoke about, because the kids did not want to take over the business, so we didn't have to work through that piece of it. But what we did have to work through is, how do you change the direction of the business? And that was a unique voyage over the last 4 years. And Pat Miller had kind of pulled out of the business before I came in, and she was on the board, but she wasn't a day-to-day executive in the business, so that was simpler. Barb was still actively involved 60 hours a week in the business, and so that was a very unique transition. And particularly with a founder who I think is an extraordinary lady, had extraordinary admiration throughout the company for everything that she had created. And so it was trying to rebalance that, and how to do that right was quite a sensitive process. But I think we ended up in a really good place at the end of the day. But it took a lot of sensitivity and legitimate respect and admiration for her. So it was never a fight between her and I. It was a voyage of how do we do what's right for the company, and how do we work through that. So, but she's been a great partner in that. Never easy, but a great partner.
About 5 minutes, so.
Can I just ask you how you manage your time? How do you get through your day? Are you highly structured with a phone and a calendar on the phone, or do you get up every day at a certain time, go to bed at a certain time? With all that's going on in your life, how do you say, this is how I'm managing my actual day so that I am productive, but don't drive myself crazy at the same time?
Yeah, great question. I would say, first of all, I definitely am not the one who does the same thing all the time, for sure. I am by nature a little bit more rebellious. I tell people, I said I can't stand driving to work the same way every day. So I have to do it different or I go crazy. So I do not like routine. I do not wake up at the same time. I do not go to bed at the same time. I just can't do it. It mentally would drive me bonkers. But in terms of specifically kind of during that day, I figure out two things. One, in the workday, nowadays with technology, there's some ways to keep yourself on schedule, and I also have a great assistant who helps keep me on schedule. But what you really find, and this is, I think, one of the hard things, at least I haven't figured out how to do it differently, as the CEO, when I'm in the office, there's not, I can count through the year, I might have 30 hours all year I feel like in the office are mine. They're just not. So, I'm in meetings and talking to people and answering questions and working through things basically 100% of the time. So my thought time is outside. And so I have a tendency to be pretty disciplined about, I wouldn't say, I work a lot, but I try very much not to be a workaholic in the sense that you've got to find the time for the break. And then a lot of my thought about the business will happen outside of the four walls, right? So. But you're always balancing, and as I say, I can go through times where I've had to sacrifice both ways, miss important meetings or miss important things at home, and I balance it different every week, every day, based upon what's going on. So, not a simple solution. It's funny, there'll be some CEOs that are very, very disciplined, right? They're like, I do this at 6, and 6:30, and 7, and 7:30. I've never been able to do that. I wish I could. Probably would be easier, but I just can't do that. It'd make me insane.
how do you find time for yourself? Like, when you talk about being a part of, the community, and always being involved, but like, when are you just like, I need to be Rob,
It's funny, for me, I don't have that much time where I would say I actually do that. I think for me though, what I find most fulfilling is being able to spend time with my family or investing in people. And so if I can help other people, that recharges me. It's so funny, right? It's like you have to find out what recharges you. And for some people, you need that time alone. For some people, you need whatever it is. And for me, it's helping make an impact on people. So if I can do that, I'm good to go. If I go through a period where I feel like I'm not having any impact, that's where it gets hard, right? That's where I start to feel drained. So I always remembered I went to one of the. You'll find out as you go through your career, you've been doing it in school and you'll do it for the rest of your life, because there's always new training, new something, and you go to all this different training. And I forget that perfect training on introvert, extrovert, because it's so funny. I am an introvert by nature. My story is, I can give you, my story is that I was a very shy kid, very quiet kid. I'll never forget, I was in high school and I felt God wanted me to do a Bible study in school, and I was like, it was the worst thing I could have ever felt in my life. And I did it, but I was like nauseous, and I was like sick, and much. But being in my jobs that I've always been in, right? I've always been in positions pretty much of leadership, because I've led stores, I've led businesses, and everybody's like, you're an extrovert. I'm like, I'm not an extrovert. And the best definition was, at the end of the day, if you go into a group of people, are you charged by the time you walk out? Or do you need to go into a room by yourself and get recharged? Do you drain the battery or fill the battery? And so for me, you've got to find out what fills your battery and what drains your battery. Find time for that. So I fill my battery by helping others. So that's what I try to do.
I'm going to stop it there to honor your time, but Rob gave you his email, and I know he'd be happy to answer additional questions. First of all, let's thank him.